Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 316 of the All Dolphins podcast. Actually, this is take 3. We have tried a few times to do this without much success because of internet issues, which are caused by the fact that I happen to be in Iceland at the moment. And no, I'm just not just frolicking with family on vacation. I'm actually here because I got a tip that the representatives for Tua Tagovailoa and Brandon Shore actually are meeting here in Reykjavik. So I'm trying to look into it and digging up all the information I can tell. How's that, Perk?
On the job, baby. This job takes you to strange places. So there we go.
Absolutely. Okay, fine. That's not really why I'm here. It's a family vacation. It's our once a year big blow up trip. Which is wrapping up this week. I will be back in Miami on Sunday nights. I have been following everything that goes along that's been happening with the Dolphins, including there might be some sort of situation with their quarterback and some contract. I kid. Yes. But we'll talk about that in the first couple of days of training camp, the addition of Emmanuel Ogbah. We discussed last time the loss of Shaq Barrett and the significance, if any. And much of the delight is, I'm sure, that we got a lightning quick history lesson, 2016. Adam Gase's first year, Dolphins made the playoffs. J.J. had 3 200-yard rushing games. There you go. The end. That's it. How's that for a quick history lesson?
I like it, baby. I like it.
Okay, we'll get right down to it. Again, we're going to discuss everything and anything that's been going on with the Dolphins since they opened training camp. And starting with the fact that always, Perk, how do you classify day one of opening camp? Do you do it on veteran reporting day or you do it the first day of practice?
I say that training camp opens the day that the veterans report, but then the first practice is a separate, it's kind of like another first day of school.
Okay, and we're going to have a disagreement right off the bat. This is what makes this show lively. I disagree with you. To me, guys, here's the thing. Is the veterans reported this year on July 23rd. The rookies and I think some selected veterans, those who were rehabbing, reported on July 16th, which is why you see guys go on PUP. You saw a bunch of guys on July 18th is because they had already been in the building going through their physical examination, at which time the Dolphins realized or determined not ready to practice. Therefore, you go on PUP. We are up to what do we have? 7 guys on PUP. If we count Chubb, Phillips, Cameron Good, Isaiah Wynn, Odell Beckham Jr., David Long Jr., Savon Ahmed was on NFI. He's off NFI. Mark Perry was on NFI. He's off AFI. Now rookie Taj Washington, 7th round pick from USC, is on injured reserve. The new rules allow teams, when it comes time to the cuts to 53, to take 2 guys who have already been placed on IR and designate them to return at that time. Kind of have a hard time envisioning that Taj Washington is going to earn one of those spots again because he's a rookie 7th round pick.
Right. I think he's probably done for the season.
Okay, fair enough. So that takes care of the housekeeping portion of this show. The big news, obviously, is Tua Tagovailoa, who still doesn't have his contract extension, and who's now, if it wasn't clear before, it's certainly clear now. He is holding in. Did only 7-on-7 individual work on Wednesday, the first day of practice, day 1, as I call it. And in his 2 snaps and on 11-11 were both handoffs. On Thursday, nothing at all. Thursday also, should be pointed out, was a day where a lot of veterans were given the day off, including Teron Armstead, Jonnu Smith, Jordan Poyer, I believe. Who am I missing?
Hang on. Let me think. Calais Campbell.
Okay.
And I'm missing one more. I can't think of who it is. Calais Campbell, Teron Armstead, Jonnu Smith, Jordan Poyer. I'm missing one, but a lot of guys got the day off, and it's not exactly clear if Tua had the day off or if this was part of his hold-in. But, it was interesting to note, Poop, that in the first segment of practice, Tua was out there stretching with everybody during the normal thing that the team usually stretches indoors for all our viewers in the indoor facility, and then they'll go outdoors for the first period of practice, which is usually special teams. And the quarterbacks are off on a different field. And at that time, the quarterbacks just kind of do individual things. They'll toss the ball around casually. During that period, Tua had his hands in his pockets. And we all thought that was interesting. It was almost as though he was making it clear that he wasn't working today. Other guys like Jordan Poyer or some of the defensive backs who aren't on special teams are in the same area as the quarterbacks. They're on the same field, just on a different part of the field. They'll kind of be going through drills, Jalen Ramsey, Jordan Poyer, a couple other guys, but Tua had his hands in his pockets. It was almost like he was making a statement during period one. I'm not even casually tossing the ball. I want everybody to know I'm not doing anything today. Again, we don't know exactly why. We don't know if it was part of the hold-in or if it was a veteran day of rest. But I will say this, Poop, and back me up on this. I don't believe to this point Tua has ever had a veteran day of rest. So I tend to believe it was part of the hold-in.
Oh, no, there got some church bells going off here, so maybe there's some symbolism there involved here. No, I don't recall the last time, and it probably has happened. I don't recall Tua ever having a quote-unquote veteran day off. So it's let's just say 99.73% related to the contract hold-in. We've discussed this ad nauseum. Who has the leverage? Whether is this going to accomplish anything? How much of a problem is it? I know you wrote, because yes, even while I'm on a family vacation and seeing some sites in Europe that are absolutely breathtaking, and quick tourism alert, if you get the chance to go to Norway, do so like yesterday. Norway is absolutely spectacular, and Iceland's not far behind. So, but having said that, I have kept, obviously, abreast of every single solitary thing that's gone on, all the developments. And I know you wrote that your thought was like the spit would hit the fan more so starting with the joint practice against the joint practices, the two against the Atlanta Falcons, which happens to be next week, by the way. It's actually coming up pretty quickly. And the big question always with Tua is, again, who has the leverage? How much is it going to hurt the team if he's continuing to hold in? I have maintained all along. I mean, I'm not the only beat writer. Sorry, who has said the proper move for the Dolphins is to have Tua play on the fifth-year option, and invariably you're going to get some people are going to say, "Well, what if you don't have Tua as the next option?" Well, nobody's talking about an next option right now because the Dolphins basically have him under their grasp contractually in 2024 with the fifth-year option. Next year they can apply either the franchise tag, which would be some $43 million, or the transition tag, which would be $35 million, but would allow teams the opportunity to sign him to an offer sheet, which then you can match.
Right.
So this notion that the Dolphins have to get something done now or never is ridiculous to me.
It is, but I wouldn't transition tag him. I talked about this with Omar Kelly today. Here's why I wouldn't transition tag him is because you then allow.
Sorry.
Well, you then allow another team to set the price for Tua. You set the price right now with your negotiating and your franchise tag. If another team signs Tua to, let's just say Dallas breaks ways with Dak Prescott and they sign Tua to a $58 million offer sheet. Well, you going to get Dak for 60? Like what? Don't let another team do your negotiating. No transition tag, franchise tag them. If you don't get to an extension.
Yeah, okay, but the flip side can be made. That here's the other thing too is there will be time between the end of the 2024 season and the start of free agency when you can take care of an extension if Tua plays on the 5th-year option and balls out to the point where the Dolphins are slam dunk, we have to get something done. And also understand this. This is a point that somehow very often doesn't get made. It's always the Dolphins need to take care of Tua. Again, it's a negotiation. Do the Dolphins need to take care of Tua at whatever price Tua wants, or do the two sides need to work together to come up with an arrangement? And then the other part is, are the Dolphins obligated to give Tua a contract that looks like what the Detroit Lions did with Jared Goff, what the Jacksonville Jaguars did with Trevor Lawrence? Are they obligated to do that? Because as Tua said in minicamp, the market is the market. These are all factors involved. It's really not that simple. Another point I want to make, and this was brought up, I don't want to be an alarmist here, but for those who scoff the fact that nothing has gotten done yet because, hey, the Bengals didn't sign Joe Burrow until the week of the regular season a couple of years ago, the big difference there is that Joe Burrow had a year left on his contract. He was not headed into his 5th-year option. So that's kind of apples and oranges. So, yes, there is some sort of urgency. The argument was made by somebody, I don't recall who, in the media. Why didn't the Dolphins and Tua set some sort of a deadline? Because, as we know, wise men once said, deadlines spur actions.
Mm-hmm. But, this isn't a Mike McDaniel deal, but we know that Mike McDaniel does not like deadlines. I don't know what Chris Greer's policy is on that, but if you ask Mike McDaniel about pretty much anything, right? Especially players returning from injury, especially Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb, no timeline/dateline. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Chris Grier is using that same philosophy with the Tua contract negotiations, but I think that I get the sense that there's been a sense of urgency from both sides, because when you listen to Mike McDaniel speak, he acknowledges the importance of this deal, but he also acknowledges the significance of it to both sides, to the Dolphins organization and to Tua and his family. So, as you say, this is not an easy deal. There are a lot of obviously there are a lot of complications and different levels and hurdles that you have to cross here. I did think that something was going to be done before camp opened. I still think that something will be done before the season starts. But I also agree with you. Y'all got to follow me on this. I do think that Tua should have to play on his 5th-year option. But I thought the sides were close enough, the Dolphins and Tua, that something was going to get done. I am mildly surprised that it appears the Dolphins are so dug in.
Or could the argument not be made that Tua and his representation are also so dug in?
Right.
And again,
we don't know.
It takes two to tango. And I am sitting here as somebody who will tell you, and I mentioned this on Twitter, but because, yes, follow me on Twitter at Poupart NFL. When we have downtime, because we've taken a couple of bus tours, which are absolutely fabulous and get you to really cool locations. But there is some downtime. They have Wi-Fi on the buses, and I scroll through Twitter, and then I've interacted. And somebody kind of pushed back to me because I mentioned how much I hated the Jared Goff trade. And I think the suggestion was well, don't you think Goff is a top 10 quarterback? And I'm like, no, I don't. And this is why I from a Dolphins standpoint, I hated that deal. First of all, if I'm a Lions fan, I hate that deal. I don't think Jared Goff is that dude. And for the Dolphins, again, it's set a bar. It's for a quarterback who is, for lack of a better way of saying it, the beneficiary of fabulous circumstances around him, better than most. And again, because this always comes up, every quarterback needs weapons around him, needs a coach who believes in him, needs a good offensive system. Yes, some need him more so than others, and some will accomplish less if they don't have that kind of support system around them. And Jared Goff, to me, is one of those guys. And the question is, where does Tua fit in? Obviously, Tua, I shouldn't say obviously, but most observers will tell you he's not in the category of Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. You could name others. I'm not going to at this time. To me, he's kind of very similar to Jared Goff. If you want to say he's better than Jared Goff, I wouldn't fight back. And yes, Jared Goff has had, I know this is where you're going to tell me, well, Jared Goff has gone to the Super Bowl, and Jared Goff also went to the NFC Championship game last year, which is true. But to me, he's still certainly not an elite quarterback. So there are a whole lot of factors involved in this whole Tua situation. And again, if he was a slam dunk elite top 5 quarterback in the NFL, this deal would be done already.
That's right.
He was a good quarterback, but there are some factors involved here.
Poop, a couple of things here. I think among Justin Herbert with the Chargers, Jared Goff with the Bills, Trevor Lawrence with the Jags, 2 of those 3 teams are going to regret giving out those contracts after, say, 2 or 3 years, because those guys are not that good. All 3 of them might regret it. I don't think that there's going to be 2 of the 3 that go, yes, that was great. And in 2 years from now, they're going to be going, that was well worth the money. I just don't think that's the case. I think a lot of these quarterbacks are overpaid. And I think that the Dolphins are looking at a lot of these other deals and going, yeah, we don't want to go down that road. Here's another part of this thing, Poop, that, the relationship between Tua and Mike McDaniel is so close and so tight. It's such a good bond, and they're in such a similar spot, right? Because they both need to win this year. Now, not that either of them is going to lose their job if they don't win and win a playoff game, but they need each other, Poop. They need each other to, like, starting with the Jacksonville game and then for the Buffalo game 4 days later. So I'm wondering, when you do get to these joint practices against Atlanta, against Washington, and against Tampa Bay. Because Poop, well, if to me, if Tua's not out there and doing everything in those joint practices, they're almost a waste of time. It's not a big deal today and in these next few practices if Tua isn't doing everything. It wasn't a big deal today that Tua didn't do anything. But when the way that the training camps are structured now, the veterans get their best and most important work in joint practices, not in preseason games, not in intra-squad. It's in those joint practices. And that's why I say August 6th, what's going to happen? Because if Tua's not doing everything, the stuff that he doesn't do, it's almost a complete waste of time for the Dolphins offense. And I wonder if that's going to weigh on Tua, if Tua will look at his teammates and say, I'm shortchanging them. If Tua will look at his good friend, Mike McDaniel, and say, I'm kind of not giving this guy a fair shot. We know that Tua is a big team guy, Poop. And I wonder how much, when he sees them out there against Atlanta in the joint practice, I wonder how much that'll weigh on Tua.
It's a very good point. That's a very good point. And then as you were talking about the joint practices, let me correct myself. The joint practices are not next week, they're the following week. So bet down. See what happens.
Yeah, you're right. Almost. It is 2 weeks. I guess it is. Yeah. I was thinking August. Yeah. You're right.
I'm off my game. This is what happens when you get on vacation mode. Okay. Now the big question, of course, when it comes to the Dolphins and in this situation and who needs to cave, and the caving for Tua is basically practicing fully or the Dolphins giving him the contract. And the reason the Dolphins would give him the contract is so they have Tua and they don't have to go to Mike White. I have said before, and I think I said in one of our podcasts that we actually did that because of internet issues, I couldn't post, much to my chagrin. That the truth is, we don't know what Mike is and what Mike White could do in this offense. And I'm going to stop anybody right now. No, I am not saying the offense would be exactly the same. I am not saying Mike White is as good at Tua. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that we just do not know. Okay, because these first 2 days of practices is probably the most work that Mike White has gotten. Correct me if I'm wrong here, that Mike White has gotten with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, because, for example, in the spring when Tua was doing the offseason hold-in, well, Waddle and Hill didn't work either. So Mike White was not throwing to those guys, and that's not the same. That's not how you work the timing. We're 2 practices in. Based on the reports, it's not been horrible what Mike White has done. It's not been standing out one way or the other. Again, we don't know. And for those who automatically assume that if you lose a quarterback like this in an offense like that, it's going to go to crap. I brought up, this is when one of our ill-fated podcasts that never made the light of day, that in 1999, Kurt Warner was an unknown backup quarterback for the Rams out of the Arena Football League who had 0 NFL credentials. And the Rams had this talent all over the place on offense with Marshall Faulk, Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, Orlando Pace, and Trent Green sustained an torn ACL. I think it was the preseason opener. And oh my Lord, the Rams had a little look of a really, really good team. Now it's all gone to crap because Trent Green's out. And boom, Kurt Warner steps in. They go to the Super Bowl and they win the Super Bowl. Not saying that there's an equivalence here. I am just saying we knew even less about Kurt Warner in 1999 than we do about Mike White in 2024. Should it come to that? Perk?
Yep, I agree. You know what? And the funny thing is, the only Kurt Warner that I knew at that time was the running back from Penn State. And I'm like, who is this Kurt Warner guy? Like, what are you talking about? And the dude's in the Hall of Fame now. Let me say this, Poop. When you talk about who needs to cave, and I don't exactly know, but here's one thing that I'm guessing Tua's representation is brought up, or Tua's agent, or it's occurred to Tua. You play this year just on that 5th-year extension, and you've got nothing beyond this. You know your injury history. You know this offensive line. Are you willing to risk that? You know, are you willing to risk that? You don't want to get shortchanged, but I would rather be shortchanged and have multi-year security than to put it all on for the second time in 5 years. I'm going to play all 17, or I'm not going to sustain an injury, or we're going to win a playoff game, or the arrow is going to keep going up. Like, you're not totally in control of that. Like, if Tyreek gets injured, or if so, I think that's one of the biggest factors working for the Dolphins, and that's got to be in the back of Tua's mind, is that I've got no security beyond this season, and I know that I've got an injury history, and I know that, I don't know that Chris Greer should not say this at the negotiating table, but the offensive line is suspect, and if Teron goes down, it's really suspect. So, multi-year security has got to be something high on Tua's priority list. I believe Lamar Jackson went through this, right? He bet on himself, and he ended up winning, but I don't know, Poop. I think that's got to be a major consideration for Tua.
Yeah, and another way to put it is what, $175 million guaranteed is in the hand is better than $220 million guaranteed in the bush, or something like that.
Yep.
However, that I completely mangled the metaphor. But something on those lines. Here's the other thing too, also, and that's part of the leverage that the Dolphins have on Tua. Maybe as much as anything else, is like, dude, are you really going to pass up the amount of guaranteed money we're giving you long term and play hardball with us and go ahead and play on your 5th-year option where you could lose all of that if there's a bad injury? So that's part of the equation. And another part of the equation here also is Tua has slimmed down. Logically, that means he's going to be scrambling more, outside the pocket more, which leaves him more exposed to big hits. Like last year, again, there were millions of factors involved in him staying healthy. One of them is he stayed in the pocket way more than he had before. And he was bulkier. He also gave up on plays a lot quicker than he did in previous years. So again, that's all part of the whole thing. Okay, let's move on, because I don't want to do everything on Tua, even though obviously he's the quarterback. It's clearly the big situation. And for those even when thinking about this, the possibility of holding out the whole season, not realistic, again, because it becomes mighty, mighty, mighty pricey. So based on the first couple of days, what have you seen from Mike White and Skylar Thompson?
They looked okay. Nobody's going to say that they're going to be Tua's equivalent. It's been really kind of spotty for both of them. Mike White seems much more in control and have a better command of the huddle. So there, in other words, there's not a lot of confusion and disarray when he's in the huddle and calling the plays. But he hasn't made a bunch of spectacular plays either. He's just kind of moved the ball down the field, very workmanlike. There hasn't been anything spectacular. The splash plays you see from Tua are not out there with Mike White, Skylar Thompson, and Gavin Hardison. I'll say this. I have seen some good stuff from the pass rush and from the defense yesterday and today, especially. Yesterday, Emmanuel Ogbah was my player of the day, my stock up guy. Today, he was wearing the orange jersey. He continued having a good day. I thought Chop Robinson had a pretty good day today, the first round pick from Penn State. I asked Austin Jackson about Chop, and he said he's explosive out of that three-point stance. That kind of jibes with his explosive first step that NFL scouts talked about pre-draft. On the back end, I thought we saw some pretty decent stuff from Javon Holland, some decent stuff. Elijah Campbell had an interception. Jalen Ramsey was his normal good self. Cater Kohu made a couple of plays out there. Cam Smith got some extended time because, Kendall Fuller. That was the other one who had the Veterans Rest Day, Kendall Fuller. Cam Smith had some extended snaps. He didn't do anything bad. You didn't notice him out there. So you take that for what it's worth, right? We noticed a few times last year for the wrong reason. Early, we noticed Cam Smith because he was knocking down a bunch of passes. Once it got into the regular season, that kind of stopped. He was fairly solid today. I thought Patrick Paul had a decent day. I know Omar Kelly said he didn't think that Patrick Paul had a decent day. He had he battled Chop Robinson to a standoff a couple of times. Chop got the best of him one time and applied some pressure on Mike White. But I've seen some good stuff out there from guys aside from the superstar players. So aside from Tyreek, aside from Jalen Waddle, but I mentioned Ogbah and Chop Robinson and Patrick Paul, Cater Kohu, Javon Holland. So Jordan Brooks has flashed a couple of times. So I think it's been a very solid. Oh, by the way, I did see Liam Eichenberg did okay on a couple of snaps against Zach Sealer. I'm not saying that Liam is going to be a solid starter all year, but I'm saying that he's probably picking up from where he left off last season. So take that for what it's worth.
Okay. Just one quick thought about what you mentioned, and I started off by asking you about the backup quarterbacks, and I want to throw that out there because there was some suggestions, some people on social media, some fans, like this idea of Skylar Thompson maybe battling Mike White for the number 2 quarterback job. Sorry, not seeing it in any way, shape, or form.
No, I don't see that either. And look, Mike White is a veteran, okay, and what we saw from Mike White with the Jets and the toughness and playing with the rib injury and the teammates praising him and the fans going crazy. Mm-hmm. We didn't see that with Skylar. Granted, Skylar was a 7th round rookie when we saw him playing 2 years ago, but we didn't see significant progress from Skylar last year. I have not seen significant progress from Tyler in OTA's mini camp or 2 days of training camp. Granted, that's a very small sample size this year, but I think Skylar would have to jump pretty high to overtake a proven veteran like Mike White. I have not seen any threat of that to this point.
No, I agree. And there was a reason the Dolphins went out and got Mike White last year when Skylar had started games at the end of his rookie season, is because the Dolphins wanted somebody I think they could trust more with the offense if something happened to Tua. So to me, that's an absolute non-story there. You mentioned Emmanuel Ogbah, and props for the scouting eagle eye on making him your stock-up guy, and then he gets the orange jersey.
Let me say this. I wrote a column today talking about the Anthony Weaver defense, and I told fans on Sunday the first practice that fans can watch. Keep an eye on this defense. The stuff that I've seen from the defense has been stuff that we haven't seen from Dolphins defenses recently. Calais Campbell had a quote about, we can blitz from so many different positions, and we can disguise things. We can do the same stuff. We can do different things out of the same formation, and it can be very confusing to offenses. I think that this is an even more creative defense than last year. And I thought Fangio had a pretty creative defense. I know he didn't blitz a lot, and he didn't mix up man and zone. He stayed in zone. But I thought the way that he made up for the absences of Jalen Ramsey and Jerome Baker and Chubb and Phillips, I thought that was pretty creative. He did some good stuff. I think Anthony Weaver is going to do even more creative stuff. Keep an eye on it Sunday, but also understand that Sunday fans are able to videotape stuff. So maybe they pull back on some of the creative stuff, and you don't see the same stuff because they don't want it out there publicly. We can't tweet stuff in these closed practices. The media, we can't video it. We can't put it out there for people to see. So there's a chance that they are a lot more open in the practices that aren't open to the public. But I've really been impressed and excited by what I've seen from this Anthony Weaver defense, the use of personnel, the use of formations. I think it's going to be another good year for the Dolphins defense, because they were number 10 in the league last year.
Okay, I want to address that. And before I address that, though, the good old media reporting rules, and most teams in the NFL have those. There are certain things that we're not allowed to report that we see. Mm-hmm. That includes, generally speaking, starting lineups, players playing at a position other than what's listed on the roster, trick plays, certain things like that. But you mentioned the one thing I want to take issue with in a very polite, friendly way. Mm-hmm. You kind of insinuated that Anthony Weaver's defense is going to bring up things that we haven't seen in several years. Well, to me, the Brian Flores defense was all about pressure from all types of different places, also disguising it. There were times, I remember a couple of games where it looks like they were going to blitz like crazy, and then they dropped everybody back and they messed with the heads. Oh, and one of the guys, Keenan Allen, wide receiver of the Chargers, when they played in 2020, said after the game the offense was confused by what the Dolphin defense was doing the entire game. I had never heard of an NFL player, a veteran particularly, who was so open about admitting that what the defense did to them completely kerfuffled them. And that's what the defense did. Now, the Anthony Weaver defense, this is the good news for Dolphins fan. If the Anthony Weaver defense is similar to that in terms of disguising and bringing a lot of pressure from different spots, this defense is a lot more talented than the one in 2020, with which the Dolphins produced great results. And I had a Twitter argument with our mutual good friend Omar Kelly when he said last year's defense was better than the 2020 defense. And I'm like, yeah, in what universe? The 2020 defense led the NFL in takeaways, and they were 6th in the NFL in scoring defense. Last year, it was 8th in takeaways and 22nd in scoring defense. And with better personnel, and even this year's personnel is better than the 2020 personnel. The only place where there could be a difference, and this is where maybe Jalen Ramsey steps up to be that guy. In 2020, this was the year where X completely balled out. I think he was 3rd in the NFL Defensive Player of the Year voting. So I do think there is major potential. Back to Ogbah. Great to see him get off to a good start. I tweeted when the Dolphins signed him to replace, and we had discussed this on one of those podcasts that's in the in the garbage can over here because of those damn internet issues, that he was a logical choice once Shaq Barrett abruptly retired on the Dolphins. And I think you would agree with me at the time. I don't know there's a major drop-off based on what Barrett did the last couple of years, and based on Ogbah now being able to be used maybe in a role that's more fitting to him than what Vic Fangio asked him to do last year in those brief appearances when he was on the field.
Yeah, I think Ogbah is going to have an active year this year. I'm not going to predict, 8 sacks or anything like that, but I think he's going to have – he had an active year last year, very limited duty, and I can't recall the numbers, but for the snaps that he played, the sacks and I think fumbles caused, and I think he had an interception, he was very active, and I think that he's going to be active again. And look, the Dolphins need that. But they're searching for players off the edge. We don't know whether Jalen Phillips or Bradley Chubb is going to be back for the opener, when they'll be 100%, if they'll be at 100%. It's going to take a rotation of edge rushers. And look, who knows how Chop Robinson and Mo Kamara are going to fare over a 17-game season. They're rookies. So, having guys such as Ogbah and Calais Campbell being able to give you some quality snaps, that's going to be essential, especially early in the year. So, look, and I'll say this, Ogbah has not always been going up against first-team tackles, but he has gone up against first-team tackle. Austin Jackson, everybody knows Teron is not out there. I don't think I'm giving away too much there.
That one's a
But I've been encouraged by what we've seen of Ogbah, a guy who was on the couch, 2 weeks ago, through 2 practices. Let's take this in baby steps and understand that it's the second day and they're not wearing pads, et cetera, all the stuff that we got to say. But it's been encouraging.
Yeah, and he was such a logical choice for the Dolphins for a couple of reasons. One of which is because, again, for what they were looking for, he fits that role, number one. Number two, so you want to talk about a seamless addition to the locker room. I mean, as somebody had asked me that, Emmanuel's a really, really good dude. So, and there were no big bridges burned when the Dolphins released him in the offseason. He understood the business decision. So it was a very seamless move. I know the Dolphins also worked out Yannick Ngakoue on that particular day. If it was going to be anywhere near close, Ogbah made perfect sense as far as that's concerned. One last thing from me here. Even though everybody keeps saying it's minor stuff and all that, why am I feeling, for lack of a better term, a little queasy about Odell Beckham Jr. starting camp on PUP when he didn't practice in the offseason?
Yeah, we don't know if this is a new ailment or rehabbing of an existing ailment or an aggravation of something. We don't know. Mike McDaniel did not speak today. He'll speak tomorrow. So, and quite honestly, we probably aren't going to ask about OBJ because he's on the PUP list, the physically unable to perform. But that's a good question, Poop. And look, some people, when they saw that OBJ was going on PUP, they rolled their eyes, and here it goes. And so it begins. The Dolphins have a lot of 30-somethings. We've talked about this. And it's off to kind of a rough start with Shaq Barrett retiring and OBJ being on the PUP list. So we'll see how this goes. But, Calais Campbell is over 30. Teron Armstead over 30. Raheem Mostert over 30. Jordan Poyer over 30. There are a lot of key players that are 30 and over. Tyreek Hill is, but he plays like he's 22. We're not worried about that. Jalen Ramsey turns 30 in October. I'm not worried about that. The dude he's a physical freak. He came back from a knee injury way sooner than he should have. I'm not worried about Tyreek and Jalen. The others you have to watch, and so we will keep an eye on all of those people. But OBJ. Poop. And let me say this. I don't think anybody thought you were getting 17-plus games out of OBJ. Right. I think if realistically from most of these 30-somethings, if they're healthy, December, January playoffs, you're happy. You would like for them to play at least 10 regular season games, but be healthy December, January playoffs, because you're all quality players. You're all key players. You're all players the Dolphins need to secure a home playoff game and win a home playoff game.
Yeah, and in the big picture type of way, normally, you don't get necessarily all that worked up with somebody starting on PUP. But again, to me, with OBJ's, again, in recent years, he's battled injuries quite a bit. We didn't see him at all in the offseason program. And it's like, okay, what's the deal here? So anyway, before we wrap up, anything else has stood out to you from the start of training camp so far?
No, I could just, I could just go position group. I think the quarterbacks have looked okay again. Nothing spectacular without Tua out there. Wide receivers, we've seen some pretty good stuff from Tyreek and Jalen. The others, Berrios and Craycraft, they've been about what you expect. Offensive line, interior offensive line remains a concern, but that is what it is. Defensive line, again, I like the pressure from the edges today. Zach Sealer is solid. We'll see what they have besides Zach Sealer. Linebackers have been kind of nondescript, but no problems. Secondary, they've been making some plays. I like what I've seen from the secondary. So that's kind of your rough position. Did I say running backs? Running backs have been okay. We've seen some decent stuff from Raheem has been very limited. We've seen some decent stuff from Achane. The other guys have been fairly limited, but at this point, I would say that the arrow is up on all position groups. Maybe on offensive line, it might be a little level. But I would say, it's been a good start of training camp. The first 2 days have been pretty good.
On the field, because everything right now, actually, yes. Though, if we're going to be honest about it, unfortunately, everything right now is being overshadowed by the fact that your starting quarterback is holding in, which is less than ideal. And it's not the same as what's going on with Jordan Love in the Green Bay Packers, which I wrote about on SI.com/NFL/Dolphins, now called Miami Dolphins on SI. Where in their case, all indications are it's a matter of time before an extension is agreed to. Not the case with Tua. So who knows how this plays out, how long it's going to take. So obviously we'll be tracking this. The plan is that this was the start of regular daily podcasts. Now that I'm off the ship, which was great in every other way other than the internet completely sucked. And then so we'll be back at it again tomorrow. As always, much appreciated, my friend Chris Perkins. And that is going to be all for today as I try to put our logo at the end here to wrap it up. Thanks, everyone, and we will talk again tomorrow.